Well, the time has actually come. 15 years later, 15 years after its prequel, the game that has uplifted and made an incredible amount of fans throughout its existence, the game that has inspired the Metro series, and we all know how freaking awesome those games are. Before I start this video, however, I'm going to say a couple of things here. For one, let me make it very clear, there will be no spoilers throughout this video. Also, despite me growing in Ukraine and being raised on this franchise quite literally, I will still treat this like any other title I cover on this channel and remain 100% fair to the rest of those games. Just because I'm a big fan of this franchise does not mean that I will hide from its pre-existing issues and ignore them in order to give this game a fair rating. Because quite frankly, there's a lot that needs to be discussed in this video. The good and unfortunately a lot of ugly. Right from the start, let me just say how wholesome it is to see this game attract so many different groups of players. People that never even played Stalker series at all of a sudden doing reviews and covering this game with little to no previous knowledge of the original series. It's a whole different perspective and point of view from the community and what we have to say, and it allows us to keep things more organic and natural, if you will. So, for the sake of this video, I'm using the pure recommended settings to play this game and test things out based on what developers recommend. And despite the fact that this game has surpassed the Red Dead Redemption 2 in file size is absolutely nuts. There's no doubt that in order to run this game on your rig and have a semi-decent experience, you'll have to have a pretty good build. And even then, this game will test your computer to its limits. The game is poorly optimized, there's no question about it. It has to be one of a few selected games this year so far I've tested that are so badly optimized, in my opinion. There's literally people running this on RTX 4080 and they lose way over 20 frames upon entering the safe zone in this game. And even when the dynamic weather changes are happening in the game, their frames downscale even more. Also keep in mind the recommended settings for this game are way under what an RTX 4080 build is and what the system can achieve. So for the sake of this video, I kept everything at medium settings while prioritizing performance over quality, because having anything over medium with the recommended settings and specs for this game was just painful to watch. Although the visuals of this game, even on medium settings, still try to shine through and make it very clear to its player that this is the next level improvement from the original Stalker series, and 15 years never looked so obvious ever before, this was a painful experience nonetheless. I don't think there's anything you can do at this very moment as we speak, as of making this video, to improve the performance of this game until they optimize it further down the line. Even if you use the low settings, it still looks awful and yet still manages to lose frames along the way. Once again, we're talking about using the recommended settings here. So yeah, optimization here is desperately needed. Let's move a little over to the next thing that I have to talk about. That may not play a huge role to the newcomers, but as someone who was raised on this franchise, let me tell you how much I hate when the politics influence games. Obviously, this being a Ukrainian studio inspired by a Ukrainian setting, with their current conflict with Russia, they decided to completely abandon the Russian language and erase it from its entire existence, which is what the original series was built on. Even if you watch the previous teasers for this game years ago, way before there was anything truly done to this game, as far as production, they used Russian in order to showcase some of the trailers and teasers for this game.
Готово.
Ну и пошли они нахрен.
There will be no Russian whatsoever. It is completely erased and for good. So now you only have two options available to choose from: Ukrainian and of course English. Obviously, I prefer playing this in Ukrainian because playing this in English and running into British-speaking people in Chernobyl was a bit off-putting for me. And it seemed to try to run away from the originality in that sense. Sure, you can argue that at this point there's new visitors in Chernobyl from other countries, but still it didn't quite sit right with me. Let's move on and talk about inventory management and gun mechanics. As far as your inventory goes, everything is exactly the same from the original series, which is, again, let me go a little critical here. You have flipped your entire game upside down in a good way as far as graphics and everything goes once they run the way they were intended to run. And you're trying to improve on the old, so to speak, and make 15 years look very drastic here, right? But what happened to the rest of the inventory here? Why are we reusing the outdated inventory, that outdated look that hasn't changed one bit? As an original Stalker player, I get it. It makes sense to me, right? You want to bring that nostalgia. But I want to be fair and talk from somebody who has never played this game, as a newcomer to the franchise. This is clearly outdated and feels disconnected from the rest of the game. Same goes with certain sound effects. Some of them have clearly been reused from the original series without any change. Now, sound effects is one of those things, it's hit or miss. If you're an old school guy, you played the old series, you will catch on to it. If you're the new guy, it's new to you, right? So the sound effects only applies to certain people. The inventory, however, will apply to everybody. Let's talk about AI behavior. Well, they need some work as well. Although for the most part, the voice acting is 90% convincing in Ukrainian, that is. English is sadly a whole different story in my opinion. The way AI behaves in this game is very buggy and clearly robotic. It's as if it was just copy and pasted and there was no effort done at all when it comes to recording the cinematics between the conversations. Almost every encounter with another stalker or a bad guy in this game results with them tossing a grenade towards you to the point where it becomes too predictable and far from reality. That system definitely needs to be reworked and properly balanced. It's so bad that 90% of the time they simply just toss a grenade in your direction before you even fully acknowledge that they are there in your presence. It's too disconnected in my opinion. The side quest people you talk to and the characters you engage with through the main storyline also feel very Stalker-like. Sometimes they stare right through you, and often than not, they don't even acknowledge your presence with the conversations. They have that distant eye look to them that's also a bit more freaky and creepy looking. Once again, some will try to pull that, well, it's a Stalker game card. No, we are not going to play that game, folks. With that mindset, we can have GTA 5 with Sandra's graphics, and I bet that would raise a lot of criticism amongst fans. Now, let's talk about the gun mechanics. The way your weapons feel in this game and handle are done so well with a careful approach to detail. Every gun feels different and has a different feedback to it. The weapon customization also feels very refreshing and simple to grasp your mind around. Your weapons also get worn out here, and if you don't take care of your weapons and your equipment, it can cause you your entire gameplay session. Stalker series is huge on inventory management as well. This is the type of game you'll play with constantly comparing your gear sets, meanwhile trying to manage and to either throw away or sell your stuff that serves no good. And there's a lot of that. If you hate the idea of staring into your inventory system every 5 minutes, and I kid you not, this may influence your decision into buying this game. The weight system serves a huge purpose in this game, and unless they come up with a mod to cancel that out, this is something you'll have to get used to quite a bit. There's a lot of weight system management here. So the game is $60, it's not running well, even on the medium settings turned on, meanwhile playing on the system that the game recommends for you to play on. As I'm making this video, what do we do? And most importantly, should I even still buy this game? I would strongly suggest if you're a new beginner, you're not a big fan of Stalker series, this is your first game stepping into it. For one, I'm sure you're probably going to be very disappointed with this game and the performance. Now, you may catch on to the trend and be like, well, there's a big fan base for this game, and for that sole reason, I'm going to buy it. And that's the only reason that's going to force you to buy this game, is just realizing that there's a fan base and there's a huge community for this. If it wasn't for that, this would be a really terribly optimized game, you guys. Having that said, if everything's fixed, this is a pretty decent buy. But I'm saying if you're gonna put a $60 mark on the game, come on now, it has got to be better. Why are we buying games that are half-assed and run poorly to this day in 2024? And I would hold off just to simply blow some smoke up their ass to make sure it's known, hey, if you request $60 for this game, it has got to be playable at the very least. Is that a lot to ask for? Let alone, I can talk about this for ages, but I just hate the fact that the more games are being made nowadays and released, they're being released in a poor-ass shape. Why is everything early access nowadays? Why can't we have a studio like Rockstar that genuinely takes the time to make their game until it's nearly perfect? Some Rockstar games had a few hiccups here and there, don't get me wrong, especially when they released the GTA trilogy. For the most part, however, they are very strong behind their games and their products. They don't binge produce games like Ubisoft does. It's a bit irrelevant in this conversation, but I'm just saying. I understand that this game took 15 years, whether it's been in production for 15 years or it's been in the back of somebody's mind for 15 years, it doesn't matter. There's been 15 years. I understand game production and game development is hard, I get that. But as a side note, that's also the reason why every time Rockstar game comes out, people immediately seem to buy it without actually waiting or doing anything else. Because most of the time, people know that they buy a quality product. That's 95% of the time. Once again, there's hiccups here and there, but most of the time, it is the truth. We just have to have that mindset back, because I could have sworn back in the day this was not acceptable. And back then, developers would feel embarrassed if something was released in the state that it is now and people had the same receptions from audience. I feel like developers would genuinely feel very embarrassed. Everything released nowadays is in early access, once again, but it is such a big bullet to swallow, if I had to say so myself. Once again, I told you I'm not going to sugarcoat this. I'm going to be straight up honest with you. The whole politics side of things, I don't really agree on that too. You're making a game that was based on Russian language because of some conflict in your country with another country. Why would you try to completely ignore and try to forget the language that you've spoken before the conflict? Let me just give you a little side note here. Little side story real quick. Ukrainians, for the most part, before the conflict, we're going back in like early 2000s and like maybe even 2010s, Ukrainians always spoke Russian. Anywhere you went on streets, everybody spoke Russian. And the only people that would speak Ukrainian were kind of like older generation, older people. But as a Ukrainian, it is normal for you to speak Russian and Ukrainian, but most of the time Russian was used in schools, in colleges. That's what people used to speak. Obviously, with the conflict, my personal opinion and my personal point of view here, I'm not going to try to forget the language my mother taught me when I was a kid because of some conflicts and shit. I'm not going to do it. But you take it as you will.